So my part is the easy part, or the difficult part. I'm going to discuss basically what you're going to tell your patient. So what you know is, you know that you have a patient who's very ill. You know you have a patient who you probably can't stand off whatever is causing the illness. And you're faced with a patient, and the patient wants to eat. So I'll begin with this short description. So this caretaker says his daughter came last November, and she was forcing him to eat gelatin. And I said, he does not want to eat it. Let him decide what he wants to eat. She would say, Dad, you've got to eat, you've got to eat. And then he would become agitated and he would say no. And she would still say for him to eat to be strong. At the end, I was watching his daughters trying to coax him and never giving up. And I said, good Lord, leave the poor man alone. So I'm sure all of you have been through a similar situation where you have a patient who does not have appetite, who you know they are terminally ill, who you know that there is nothing you can do about their appetite, or the little you can do probably will not help them much. How do you deal with this particular scenario? So we then go back to the basics of medicine. So we go back to the basics of the principles of ethics of the patient. So what does the patient want? Look at the autonomy of the patient. Do they want to eat? Do they not want to eat? If they want to eat, what do they want to eat? If they've gotten something they want to eat, how frequently do they want to eat? So it becomes very important to always examine, look at the patient, what do they want? And then whatever you're doing, are you causing harm to the patient or are you not causing harm to the patient? Are you helping the patient? And then in whatever you're doing, are you justified? Are you giving justice to the patient in whatever you decide to do? So it becomes very important that whatever goal you decide to set, it's a shared goal. It's for both the patient and the patient's caretaker and yourself as a doctor. So supporting identification and honoring the patient's preferences for treatment are always very central to how you're going to deal with your patients. So the ethical dilemmas, first of all, you have to decide, are you benefiting or are you becoming a burden to the patient? Are you balancing how you're going to take care of your patient? Are you looking at the interests of the patient? Are you looking at the interests of the family? And most of all, the wider society, which is around the patient. So for you to make a good decision, you have to be able to look at all the ethical principles and communicate efficiently. So as you're communicating with your patient, remember, the patient has no independence. They cannot decide what they want to eat because they don't want to eat in the first place. They feel like they are failing the society. They feel like they're failing themselves. They are very helpless because they want to do something about it, but they know they cannot. They are conflicting with their family members. They're not getting along. They're feeling like they cannot join in the party of their birthday party of their child. They cannot celebrate the Christmas celebrations because they cannot eat. I mean, imagine if you went for a Christmas party and you cannot eat. How would you feel? Christmas is about eating, but you cannot eat. So how would you feel? It is, essentially. And the patient is thinking that I am wasting away, I don't have that much time left. So they have thoughts of imminent death. So all these are things that are distressing the patient. So when we are thinking about the goals of communication with the patient, we first of all want to assess, what does this symptom mean to the patient? This quote says, I always thought cancer patients would lose weight because they have something in their stomach which is stopping them from eating. But not all cancer patients are going to lose weight because they have something. So they will not understand what does this mean. In other cases, a patient will say because they have, say for example, peptic ulcer disease, they'll deal with the pain. But then when they realize actually cancer, they'll say, no, I cannot deal with this pain. So it depends, what does this symptom mean to the patient? And then you also say, it's also a sign of progressive illness to the patient. They look at themselves every day in the mirror and they see that they're not improving. This patient says you don't necessarily have to get onto the scales for you to see that the bones are beginning to protrude and the end is getting near. So they actually know what is happening. They need you to actually talk to them and tell them what is happening. So it's very important to address the fears of the patient. This patient says, it would have been wonderful if someone looked at me and told me, look, you have lost 5 kg so far and the end is not far away. Perhaps with a little bit of luck, in 3 weeks' time, you have lost another 5 kgs. That will be the end because your body will not be able to sustain a waste of weight. Can you imagine telling this to a patient? in any of your given hospital settings, walking to the patient and telling them in the next 3 weeks, if you lose 5 more kgs, you will not be able to sustain, and probably that will be the end. Would you be able to do that for a patient? Isn't it a surprise now that the patient actually wants to know this? They actually want to be told that the end is near. So how you would do is you explain the difference between starvation and the cachexia model, which we have gone through. You tell them that this cachexia model is, without saying it, the body essentially and that there is really nothing much you can do short of stopping the initial process. So if you cannot treat the cancer, if you cannot treat the cardiac failure, if you cannot treat the renal failure, then there's really not much you are going to do really about stopping this process. So if you explain to them what is happening and the patients are empowered with the information, they will not feel like they are failing, because visible wasting usually symbolizes that they are failing physically, emotionally, and socially, because they cannot fit in with the society. So it's not just the patient, but it's also the society. I came across this article which says you can't say, what about me? I'm not the one who has cancer. Yes, because you're the attendant. You cannot begin to feel sorry for yourself because you are the attendant. You have to move on with your patient and support your patient. So you see this picture, the attendant is trying as much as possible to give the patient something to eat, but they don't want to eat. So what do you do if you are attendant in this situation? This is our vegetarian diet in Uganda. So you present this to your patient. You're the attendant, you're the mother, you're the father, you're the sister, you're the brother. This is your patient you're looking after. What are you going to tell them? So most important thing is to counsel them. Tell them that the caloric intake that you're providing for your patient is not solving the underlying problem, and therefore it's not going to reverse your underlying problem. Therefore, you should look for other ways of adapting your support for the patient. Look for other ways of helping the patient to cope with what they are going through. So other things like maybe reading to the patient, or talking to the patient, or playing music to the patient, something which will help you support or look after the patient, which does not necessarily mean giving food to the patient. Because that is what the attendant knows. They know as if they give food to the patient, they are treating the patient. Everyone will come to the hospital and say, why is all this food here? Why haven't you given it to the patient? So you look for other ways of adapting your support. And then the families, they also want to know what is happening. So they say nobody ever said anything about his weight. The hospital staff obviously know that he's losing weight because they weigh him, but nobody had said anything. So as the doctor, you have to be able to break the ice and tell the attendant what is happening, tell the family what is happening. Because if you do not talk about it, no one will talk about it. It will be like a white elephant in the room. So other ways to show that the patient is caring, you have to be flexible in your advice to the patient. So attempting to meet nutritional needs of each of the patients is probably the most useful guide for the patient. This was a conclusion by a study done by McCarthy in 1996, which was actually very helpful. So it's not just the family, but also the multidisciplinary team that is looking after the patient. So this is a quote by a patient who was not, the team was not talking about the patient's issues. So they said, at first I thought we were in limbo, nobody cared, that we couldn't turn to anybody, nobody seemed to help us. We just had to cope on our own. I thought that someone should have come and spoke to us as a family to tell us what to expect. When he wasn't feeling well and he wasn't eating, we didn't know whether to call for a doctor or who to turn to. So it's very important for you as a doctor, you as a team, to discuss all these issues with the patient, because they want to know. They want to know what is happening and if they are doing the best they can in seeking for medical advice. And then as doctors, there's always a dilemma of what to do in a case of cancer cachexia. This is a quote by a medical professional who said, if we treat nutrition, anorexia, cachexia with everything else that we do, and we treat it as a symptom, if we can, not to channel it, to compartmentalize it. If we could do that, then it would seem normal to talk about. So cachexia becomes very difficult to talk about because you cannot treat it. It's not like if a patient had diarrhea and you're telling them, okay, I'm going to give you some antibiotics and diarrhea will go away. That would be easy to talk about. But because there's not much you can do about the cachexia, it becomes very difficult to talk about. So you should realize that you're not alone. Every medical profession probably has the same problem, and you can always deal with it. You should deal with it. Okay.